morning, Volodymyr, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation to our digital meeting of today. And as you know, the project No War is created by the Fondazione Campagna dei Festival and is aimed to connect the artists with the cultural organization and also all the civil society by culture under the belief of festivals for peace. And the goal of this project is also to enhance the dialogue within the international artistic community in order to express dissent against all form of wars and to express solidarity to Ukrainian people. So I think it's very significant for us to have you here today as our guest and as one of the main cultural voices of Ukrainian society. So I'm very grateful to you for that, as we consider yours an important point of view as a witness to what is happening now in Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Brunella and Sabrina, for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. I think Ukraine's cultural voice today is really important internationally because it helps the international community to make sense of what is going on in Ukraine and how come that a war emerged right in the middle of Europe, right in the center of Europe, and what its aftermath and consequences could be. Like you said, I'm director of the Ukrainian Institute, which is Ukraine's cultural diplomacy and cultural relations organization. We are affiliated to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, but we are at arm's length from the government, so we are fairly independent in how we structure and program our activities and what themes and topics we choose. But of course, our activities is broadly aligned to the foreign policy objectives of Ukraine. I've been director of the Ukrainian Institute since summer 2018, and before that I used to work for the British Council Office in Ukraine for a region of countries actually that stretched between Western Balkans and Central Asia. So it included this huge territory of very diverse and different countries. And I used to work there as a director arts, as a regional marketing, communications and arts manager. So I have a great deal of expertise and experience in managing and creating international cultural relations projects. And of course, today, it's really a big part of my job is to speak to the international community, to international media, to cultural practitioners, and engage in a dialogue about what's going on in Ukraine today.
Yes. So, Volodymyr, where are you now? I was wondering if you could tell us what's the situation in your country as we are on the 40th day of war.
So I'm not in Kiev at the moment. As many people, I had to leave the capital for a different region in Western Ukraine. Most of our Ukrainian Institute colleagues have also left either for other regions of Ukraine or for other countries, neighboring countries next to Ukraine. But we continue to work remotely to the best of our ability, to the best of our capacity and our individual circumstances. But generally, the cultural sector has experienced a huge shock in the aftermath of the war because a lot of links, a lot of projects have been suspended. And, lots of opportunities just cease to exist. So I would say that cultural managers and cultural practitioners in Ukraine have found themselves in rather precarious circumstances because despite their voice being so important today for Ukraine's fight for independence, essentially, right? Many of them are now being stripped of this opportunity because they can't practice their daily jobs as they would have before the war. So my message here, I think it's really important for the international cultural organizations to find ways to engage Ukrainian voices and provide them a platform for expression, because this is really crucial for them personally and for Ukraine as well. And I'm really grateful to everyone and every organization in Europe, particularly for their overwhelming support, really, for the Ukrainians and for the programs they launched for Ukrainians. This is really precious.
And how can we help them to find their way to the engagement, for example?
Well, in the first days of Russian invasion in February, a lot of organizations in Ukraine, in the United States, not in Ukraine, but in Europe, in the United States, in North America, have launched residency opportunities that welcome Ukrainian artists and scholars. A lot have launched some funding programs for joint projects, even for those people who cannot leave Ukraine at the moment, because men, for example, are not allowed to cross the Ukrainian border because of martial law. So it's only women and children who can do that, or men above 60 years of age, I think. So a great deal of immediate response programs and opportunities have come up internationally, and this is great. What I would argue would be needed is some longer term planning, because the war will not end tomorrow, right? Yeah. We do not know how long it will last. And we already see what great destruction of infrastructure, of cities, of homes, of everything Russia has caused to Ukraine today. So the post-war reconstruction and post-war recovery of Ukraine will take years. And unfortunately, culture, I think, in many countries, not just Ukraine, is the first to be cut, right? Yeah. Whenever an economic
we have experienced that with the COVID, for example.
Exactly. So I think we all have experienced this in the COVID situation, when the government has to cut some expenses, and the first thing they do, they cut expenses in the cultural sector. So I would anticipate something similar happening to Ukraine today, and tomorrow, and in 6 months' time. So I think it's really important for the international cultural community to think ahead, to think like 1, 2, or 3 years in advance, and already today allocate budgets, allocate staff, allocate resources to engage Ukraine in a longer term perspective. So these immediate opportunities today are very important, but they will not fix the longer term consequences of this war. So whenever I speak to our partners or to the international cultural community, I would say, look, whenever you plan your activities, whenever you program what you're going to do this year or next, please leave some space for Ukraine, to show Ukrainian art, culture, films, I don't know, theater, whatever, to engage Ukrainian artists and cultural managers, to create discussion platforms that would, make those voices heard, because this recovery will take a long time. And I think this solidarity has to be longer term as well.
Do you think that now there is any space left for culture, for art, or not? I think the necessity now is for Ukrainian people and for us, for European people, is to support their fight. So we have talked with many artists, many international artists, and they have told us that there is no space now for practicing art. And so I was wondering, what's your point of view? What's your critical point of view about the necessity of the arts and of culture to continue their own existence, their own life, despite of what is happening now?
Yeah, well, I think it's absolutely essential. It's absolutely necessary, because art and culture is not something, it's not a luxury, right? It's not something we can do only when we are fine, we're safe, we're prosperous, we we have satisfied every other need we have, and only then we can move and practice culture, right? I think culture is often misunderstood in this context, because essentially arts and culture is very innate human practice. We do it every day without even noticing that we do it. So in this context, culture is a fantastic way to interpret what is going on, to tell those stories that emerge during the war, and out of context of this war. And from our experience as the Ukrainian Institute, actually, when we try to tell Ukraine's story to the world, because this is our institutional mission after all, the best we can do it is by showing a Ukrainian film or performing a Ukrainian music piece or translating books about Ukraine or giving those platforms for storytelling, for genuine storytelling. Because what you can see on the news is horrors of the war. And that's how news works. So you would see destruction, dead bodies, you would see political analysts or military experts or security experts trying to figure out how this war will end. But what you don't see human stories, real, genuine human stories behind this, and what people in Ukraine and elsewhere, for that reason, think of today's circumstances. And I think throughout the darkest days of our history of the 20th century or 19th century, art has always existed during the wars, during conflicts, during genocides, trying to make sense of what is going on, trying to set, a legacy, right, for the following generations, who would then use this cultural area of cultural practices, right, to interpret and to make sense of the past, and that's really important, because today in Ukraine we're living in this very day, in here and now, right? But time will come to look back and understand what happened, and here when culture comes in and will be of great help for this.
And Volodymyr, are you now in contact with other artists, with other people who are still in Ukraine, for example, in Kiev?
Well, yes, of course. Some of our team are still in Kiev, and some of them are planning to return to Kiev fairly soon, because the regions next to Kiev have been liberated, and we expect it to be safer to return home. We're of course in contact with artists who are based in Kiev or elsewhere, for that matter, with filmmakers, with theater makers, with visual artists, and basically what we do, we work with our international partner institutions, or whoever expresses interest in Ukraine today, and we just try to put them in contact, in touch with the Ukrainian cultural scene, hoping that collaborations will emerge, joint projects will come forward, even without us being directly involved. I think those sort of matchmaking process is something that we really can help with.
And what are their feelings? How they are? What do they think now? The artists, I think, all the people involved in this huge conflict.
Well, I would say they feel incredibly resilient and determined. So personally, I have never seen such incredible solidarity and horizontal mobilization of people who help refugees, who provide humanitarian aid, who look for medication and for supplies and for food and for other commodities, and help transport them to the east of the country, where cities are in most danger at the moment and people are most suffering. I have seen my fellow cultural managers and colleagues and filmmakers and journalists assume volunteer jobs. A friend of mine is actually is in Kharkiv at the moment. She's helping people who are taking shelter in the Kharkiv metro stations underground. So she's helping those essentially homeless people now with supplies and with medication, with food, with everything. And a lot of people just have given up their daily jobs and daily routine to engage in this horizontal network of mutual help and assistance across the country. But I mean, having said that, many people haven't abandoned their daily jobs. So my friends or fellows who are filmmakers, who are film directors, who are theater makers, playwrights, dramaturgs, writers, they continue to do their job because this is what they do. This is their profession, and they create their cultural works, artworks. They seek opportunities internationally. They make contacts with international foundations, with film funds, with museums, with depends on what their profession actually is, to move this forward, because we understand that the war will be over sooner or later, and we have to emerge from this war equipped to continue and to resume our daily routine, and we just can't allow this interruption all of a sudden to happen.
Yeah, it's very important to also let the culture continue its own existence in order to create another narrative, another storytelling of what is happening, and an independent storytelling, and to have a witness for the future of this topic. Then the last question I would like to ask you is, how can we encourage more dialogue within the European institution, within the international community of artists, to contribute to peace processes through culture?
Ukraine has been a gray area somewhere in the east of Europe that suddenly became centerpiece of news headlines, right? And now what I observe, that the world tries to understand and make sense of how come it happened that until today, we just didn't know anything about this country or their people or their culture or whatever. And that the fact that the world doesn't know much about Ukraine leads to a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of preconceptions, prejudices, or a lot of just misinterpretations of what is going on in Ukraine at the moment. So I think culture can help a lot with that, through cultural storytelling, through engagement with Ukrainian artists, with cultural managers, with the society in general. The world can make sense of what is going on here. Because the view on Ukraine so far has been very Russia-centric all over the world. So the world was comfortable with looking at Ukraine through a Russian perspective. Russia always came first, right? Because it was a huge country, it's still a huge country. It has this great classical culture, it is a political power. There have been many historical ties between France, Italy, Germany, and Russia. And I know that sentiment is quite strong. But I think it's high time to just look elsewhere and see, okay, we need to figure out what this country now is. And I think culture should work a lot and really hard. And Western academia as well, not just cultural practitioners, Western academia and scholars who have researched Russia in the first place for decades must also look elsewhere, at Ukraine, at Georgia, at the Baltic countries, at the ethnic minorities who live in Russia, who've also been colonized as the rest of the post-Soviet space, right? So a whole new perspective has to be set in motion and employed on Ukraine, and culture should be at the forefront of this.
And so do you think that culture could also be the solution to the failure of democracy and diplomacy also?
That's a hard question, because can culture fix the failure of Russian democracy, for example? I don't know, I don't think so. Can culture fix the failure of Russian civil society, who were unable to oppose Putin or stop him from turning Russia into a totalitarian state, essentially, that commits war crimes in Ukraine? No. So I used to be very actually optimistic about the role of culture and cultural relations before the war, because for my entire life and career, I worked in a disposition, in projects that encouraged cultural dialogue for peace. But now I can see that this tool is failing us.